Mini episode 923 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode number 923. We have a great treat for you here today. We're going to be speaking about the book, The Future of Men, Masculinity in the 21st Century, a very timely book with its author, Jack Myers, who is somebody who has some mutual friends in common with us. The site where he is the proprietor, MediaVillage.com, our good friends Simon Applebaum and Stuart Elliott have long since planted their flag over there, a couple of great professionals. And as far as it goes with Jack, we always like to, at the outset of any conversation here, really kind of put our guests over strong, and generally that requires some degree of research on my part, but thanks to having this excellent book in my hands, I don't think I've ever been so spoon-fed with a bio as this one, because this bio is so well written. I don't even really need to go any further than just to quote it. Jack Myers is a cultural, economics, and technology visionary, an award-winning documentary film producer, and an author who has researched and reported on the impact of media and technology on society for more than 40 years. Jack is the author of 4 previous books, including Virtual Worlds, Rewiring Our Emotional DNA, Reconnecting with Customers, Building Brands and Profits in the Relationship Age, and Ad Bashing, Surviving the Attacks on Advertising. His 4th book, Hooked Up, a new generation's surprising take on sex, politics, and saving the world, received international book awards in the youth issues and women's issues categories. Jack is a founder of Women Advancing, a 7,500-member all-women's dual mentoring support group, and he passionately believes that society needs to recognize how successful the women's movement has been and will continue to be, as well as to identify and address the implications for men, especially for young men and boys. And this is, as we noted off-air briefly, Jack, incredibly topical and prescient today.
Yeah, and Rick, before we jump into that, and thanks for that introduction, I know a lot of your listeners are sports fans, and the film that I produced in the 1990s was Hank Aaron, Chasing the Dream, the biography of Hank Aaron, and the documentary was nominated for Academy Award for Best Documentary and an Emmy Award, and won the Peabody Award, so I'm really proud of that involvement. I got to know Hank, and while I'm a lifelong Mickey Mantle fan and Yankee fan, I also became a Hank Aaron fan, so I'm ecumenical.
Well, that is very interesting. I'm flattered that you did your research as well. Yes, we do have a strong sports component with this show. Hank Aaron and I, the one thing I, as a lifelong resident of America's North Coast, can say, we have one curse in common, as I believe Hank Aaron is also a lifelong Cleveland Browns fan. So he wears that.
As I am, by the way.
Really? Oh.
I grew up in upstate New York, and early on, Cleveland was our home team before the Bills were around.
Okay.
And I was a Jim Brown fan, and became an anti-Giants fan and lifelong Cleveland Browns fan. Then long-suffering is absolutely right, but every fall I still wear my Cleveland Browns hat around, even though I'm in New York.
Yeah. That's an amazing story, and actually that's almost sort of reminiscent. And when we've had a couple times on the show, we've had some conversations with Bob Barker talking about the St. Louis Cardinals, because he didn't live nearby, but back at that time they were sort of the furthest west team, and there was a big regional following. What you're describing almost seems like kind of the same thing, that when there was less NFL teams out there, maybe the Browns' reach was a little bit further. That was the glory days of the Browns. I've never really thought of the Browns that way before, as far as like reaching upstate New York, but it makes sense the way you're describing it.
Well, especially since Jim Brown was a Syracuse player,
Yes.
Everyone who followed in the 50s and early 60s Jim Brown, they would much rather watch Cleveland Browns than they would rather watch Sam Huff and Y.A. Tittle, for sure.
Yeah, and I once wondered if Tim Couch would have the same effect there in northern Kentucky with peeling away Bengal fans, but that didn't work as well as converting Browns fans in the 50s with Jim Brown and Syracuse. That's an interesting angle and something that we share, much to our mutual displeasure, every autumn, Jack. And
Exactly.
you know,
every year I still put $50 on them to at least go to the Super Bowl, and every year I lose $50. But I go into it knowing I'm going to lose. So
yeah. Well, you'll be able to retire off that the year that it hits, because I can't imagine
Whenever I win, definitely that'll be my retirement fund.
I can't imagine it's going to be short odds anytime soon on that one there, but that is an amazing thing that we have in common. Completely kind of random in that way, and I have to say that in going through this book and having gotten the book very recently, grateful to your publishing house for having sent it out. Obviously, I got it and was viewing it through the eyes of the present prism of everything that's going on right now. The book came out in 2016, so it really was ahead of the curve in this way. And you describe in there with some detail early on about conversations that you'd had with younger folks who were coming up, and things that kind of identified to you about the need for such a book and sort of a hole in the marketplace. And again, I think the one thing that's been established about you throughout the course of your career is that you really are, a tastemaker kind of a person, have your finger on the pulse. So what were some of the things that were kind of jumping out at you that led you to want to write the book, as far as explaining it to the listeners a little bit, and that sort of foreshadowed the moment that we're in?
Well, thanks for the question, and it is interesting that the original subtitle was Masculinity in the 21st Century, but we've repositioned the book, and with paperback we'll have a new subtitle. It'll be The Future of Men, Men on Trial. And men are on trial. Unfortunately, in my first chapter in the book, which again I did all my research in 2014, 2015, it came out in early 2016. So when I actually wrote it, it was in 2015, and my first chapter is titled Men Are Even the Good Ones Bad? And chapter 5, the chapter title is Deny, Deny, Deny Men's Destructive Instinct to Lie. And in order to write a book about men, I felt I really had to look at it from both a male perspective and a female perspective, and the motivation for it was the earlier research I had done on the internet and the impact of the internet in society and culture, and the fact that as we looked at my 2012 book you mentioned was Hooked Up, and it was about the first generation to grow up with internet and mobile. And what the research shows you is that it's a very female-centric generation. Women are 60% of college graduates and have been for the last decade, will be for the next decade. The percentage is growing. Colleges are actually working hard to try to bring men in. High schools are increasingly predominant female. It's rare that you see a male as a valedictorian in a class. It's typically female. They're the overperformers. The dropout rate in high school among young men is extremely high, especially in economically deprived areas. The college, in 13 of the top 15 graduates, women represent 70% of the new employees being hired. That's every growth industry. They're moving up through the ranks. So as I was doing my book tour for that book, I was getting questions, well, what's happening with men? Why aren't they graduating? Why aren't they going to college? Why aren't they doing better in school and in the workforce? Why are, a couple other questions that I kept asking was, well, why is it that in major cities, young women under 30, unmarried, are out earning young men by 20%, nationally by 8%? And the statistic that blew me away was that 85 all long-term relationships are ended by the woman. And I said, all right, I got to start looking into this. I started looking for research, so at least I'd have some answers to why this was happening, and there was no research. So I started doing research. I had to take research being done on women and flipping it into men, and I started asking questions about men, and what I found wasn't a really pretty picture, and I began really looking at myself, my own life, my friends, my colleagues, and realizing that we really had to take an honest and hard look at ourselves as a species and the negative patriarchy that we've grown up with, that has been handed down from generation to generation, and recognized it as an addiction. The addiction of negative patriarchy, and how it's impacted on generations of men and women, and the politics and culture and the business world. And we're seeing that manifest today with the stories that are coming out literally every day about men's behavior and the realities of women's reactions for decades that they're now empowered to go public with. And we're going to be paying the price for those actions. And my concern is that the next generation, which is not at all like their older brothers or their fathers or their grandfathers, is going to be paying the price.
Well, they're going to be, and one of the questions that's out there right now, and I think it's a valid one, notwithstanding everything that's happening here, because it is human nature in a lot of instances here, and one of the things that sadly is never going to be erased is basically bandwagon jumping. So as we're getting into something like this here, while it's important to not go out there and go overboard and trying to blow holes in stories of victims or alleged victims or whatever, how do we balance that with due process? Because when you're talking about the ramifications yet to come, that's the biggest one I see, is that we're going to move to a guilty until proven innocent kind of a culture here, of where if somebody is legitimately being framed, which I would say in fairness is probably a tiny handful of these cases, but an idealist would say one case of somebody being framed is too many. So from the idealist's perspective, how do we protect men moving forward while still taking seriously?
I think, for better or for worse, Rick, that train has left the station.
Okay.
We are going to have that effect. There's just too much pent-up resentment, too much pent-up anger, too much pent-up reality that's going to come flowing out, and it's going to be a flood.
Okay.
And we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg today, and yes, there will be stories, men will defend themselves, and the challenge is that it's multi-layered. You cannot compare, in my opinion, an Al Franken to what's happened in Alabama, and this inappropriate sexual behavior and even rape of teenager young girls. But yet we seem to be in that category already, where the comparisons are unfortunately being drawn. But the reality is that I think for at least the next couple years, we're going to see a wave of these outings, if you will, that we're not going to be able to get out of the way of. And it's going to spread from the areas where the women have been empowered, like Hollywood, like politics. We're going to see it at the highest ranks of industry, where women are empowered and will have the ability to come out. Men no longer will have the protection of the human resources groups that have been protecting men in companies for decades, and the human resources people that have been a part of this process are going to be paying the price. We're going to see it's a huge cultural shift that we're right at the cusp of. What I try to do in my book, though, and the first few chapters are very honest. They're honest about men. They're honest about women's attitudes toward men. They're honest about relationships. But then the primary focus of my book is how do we protect the next generation of young men who have grown up in a very feminist world. They've grown up with in homes where the mother is either the only wage earner or the primary or equal wage earner. They've grown up in schools where women have been 80% of their teachers, in colleges where 65% of their classmates have been female. They're going into work companies where 60+% of the employees at their level are female. So they're feminists, and they believe in equality. They believe in pay equality. They haven't grown up with the same gender attitudes as I did, at least, and many other men. But well, I can't say I did because my mom was a working mom. She was a dominant wage earner and was an extraordinary role model for other women. But nonetheless, I think the challenge we have for younger people, younger men and women, is how do we assure that we give them the opportunity to not be judged by the sins of their fathers.
Well, and that's an interesting thing there when you mention that about how men kind of come up in the world. I'm somebody where I personally, again, being from the Midwest, being a flyover country, Roman Catholic, social conservative, I would flinch at putting the term feminist on myself. But by the same token, I believe in certainly equal pay, respect of people, and I see a grounding in traditional values as kind of tying into what you're talking about as well here, because for people who actually live up to the credo that they try to anyways, there's an inherent respect for other people. I came from a traditionalist household, but my parents put that respect into me and made me the kind of person that would not want to make my mom ashamed of me in any kind of a way. And I would have to say, looking forward here, I would intend to be a traditionalist father and to sort of impart that, but with that, there wouldn't be any kind of inherent kind of disrespect. So how do you see that as kind of tying into this?
Rick.
Yeah.
Amen.
Okay.
You and I are on the same page.
Right. So how do you see the role of like traditionalists in this? Like, I'm probably never gonna meet the modern evolved man all the way on a lot of stuff, but at a bare minimum, when we're talking about sexual assault, sexual harassment, whatever, sign me up. I'm there, and so are an awful lot of people on my side. So how do you think people from the opposite sides can make common cause?
Men like you should be the role model. The problem has been there are too many men who walk the walk, but don't talk the talk,
okay.
Don't walk the walk. Who position themselves as social, equal rights, or at least as being good men. What we would all describe as good men and good dads. We think of ourselves in many ways as whether it's good dads, good men. We believe in equal rights in the workplace. But then we don't think twice about standing in a small group of men at an event and making misogynistic or sexist comments, or telling inappropriate jokes, or showing inappropriate pictures, or sharing them online. We don't think twice about some of the realities that have gone on in the workplace for decades, if not centuries. That have just been part of our culture. And when we look at it now from the prism of the realities today, we see how offensive they are and how offensive they've been and how destructive they've been. Who don't think twice about saying that the woman's place is in the household, and the man's place is out bringing in the bacon, so to speak. And the traditional values that are fine, but when they include any form of harassment, when they include any form of physical power or economic strength that doesn't allow their wives or their or the women in their lives to have the same rights as they do, regulatory laws that are biased in one way, these are all going down. The society is just not going to accept them anymore, and challenges. We've got to separate the things you're saying in terms of what socially conservative and honest truths are, and I think every man and woman, but every man has to ask ourselves, are we completely truthful in our relationships? Are we completely honest? If we get caught doing something inappropriately, do we lie? Is that our natural instinct? And if we can't answer those questions and say, we stand on solid ground, then I think a lot of the values that we all talk about and that you correctly want to pass down to our children are not the values that are going to be accepted in the future. It's a different set of positive values. On the other hand, I applaud and commend and am 100% with you in terms of saying we need to protect, defend, and support those values when they conform to the new societal norms. And I believe that if you look back, in any religion, in any credo, in any true human state of positive relationships, that the norms you apply are the ones that we want for the future. I just believe that a too large percentage of men, especially men in power, have abused those privileges that we've been given.
Right, and I think you're very correct to focus on as one of the things there, as you did, sometimes humor that's used. And again, like everybody else out there, I'm no angel, so if I've ever, full disclosure, I can't say that my humor has necessarily always been the greatest in every situation as I look back on it, although one of the things that can kind of save you is if you have a great fear of being looked at as a hack. And there's so much misogynistic humor that's just hacky that I think a lot of us just kind of stray away from it because it's tired, it's played out, it's the same kind of thing people have been doing for so long. So, whatever reason you might have for staying away from things, that's a good thing, I suppose. But
and objectification is a way of men's lives. I mean,
yeah.
You get on, you're walking down the street, you see someone who, looks attractive walking in front of you. You kind of walk a little faster to get in front to see what she looks like. Look her up and down. You're on a public transportation or, and you're looking around saying, would I do her? Would I do her? This is
human nature.
Male, yeah. Well, it's male human nature, but what I learned in the younger generation, they're not the same. 70-80% of the younger men under 22 aren't thinking those things, and then they come into a business world, and the first, if they're on Wall Street, they're supposed to go out to the strip club, or it's okay to screw around with with someone in the workforce. Just deny. But we are at what we're seeing today, whether it's Matt Lauer or Al Franken or anyone else or Harvey Weinstein, we're seeing a tip of an iceberg of a female payback for what's been decades, even centuries of what they see as being treated, objectified, and treated as owned property. And however we look at it, I think we as men are going to have to look at ourselves, more importantly, look at our sons and our daughters and say, this new reality, how do we make sure that they have a healthy attitude toward masculinity, and that as we look at fathering our sons and daughters, that we begin identifying and begin looking at what are the positive qualities of men. How do we look at what we do that's been healthy, that's been good, that's been strong, that's been positive, and that contributes to these young people, as opposed to the focus that we have today and are going to have for the next several years of all the terrible things that men have done to women, and that we should therefore pay the price. We need to begin thinking positively, and we need to begin focusing on what's healthy, what's good, what's strong, what's positive. What do we bring to the table? What do we bring to the family? What do we bring to the workplace? And if we don't start bringing a male force, a movement, a future of men movement, to recognize the positives and begin countering this strong continuing backlash against men, we're going to be in deep trouble as a society.
By the same token, to kind of bring it full circle here, Jack, there's something, and maybe this is me just picking nits about language, as I am wont to do sometimes, but you seem like you would be somebody who would really be a strong authority that could answer my question one way or another on this. There's a term that I'm kind of troubled by out there called, as I see it being applied, toxic masculinity. But I see it being used in areas where it's almost more talking about insecure males asserting themselves. And it's a thing where I feel like if the term toxic masculinity gets used, it's sort of easier to blow it off as far as just blather about, men and the way that they act. I would sort of prefer that we talking about insecurities or the things that make men puff themselves up in that kind of a way, because that's stuff that me personally, I just can't relate to. I don't really deal with insecurity. I can spot it in other people a mile away, and most of the things that get talked about as being toxic masculinity clearly are just insecurity manifesting itself that way. So wouldn't it be more appropriate for society if we were sort of attacking it from that angle and making it something we could more easily get our arms around?
Well, we have a bigger problem in that toxic masculinity, they're becoming synonyms. They're becoming like masculinity and toxic are equal, as opposed to a description of a certain form of masculinity. I like to refer to negative patriarchy, and I like to think of it as an addiction that has been passed down from generation to generation. But there are positive, contributing aspects of masculinity, of patriarchy as well, that we want to hold on to, and we got to be careful not to, for lack of a better term, throw out the baby with the bathwater on definitions of masculinity and how we look at masculinity. So, yeah, I really agree with you. Whether it's insecurity, whether it's just overt self-esteem or empowerment or entitlement or power, however we want to refer to it, I prefer the word toxic just be thrown out of the vocabulary, because I completely agree with you. It's overused, and that we start thinking of there's positive patriarchy, there's positive masculinity, there's negative patriarchy, and there's negative forms of the way masculinity has been used to exert power. And let's address each of those forms individually and treat them and begin dealing with them. And to go back to sports, a little bit like steroids, where everyone who used steroids with no matter what level is going to be branded by that steroid brush, and men are going to who took steroids who didn't get caught are going to breathe a sigh of relief. I think there's going to be a lot of men breathing a sigh of relief on this wave, as well as men who are being found guilty in the court of human opinion, even if not in the courts of law. And some of those will be guilty, some of those won't be. But ultimately, I think we're going to look back at this as a period of equilibrium being discovered, and hopefully it won't last very long.
Well, very well put. And again, I think you're exactly right. I don't like the term toxic being applied to masculinity, because it is a throwing out the baby with the bathwater kind of a thing. Masculinity, as it should be practiced, is something that we should prize and we should treasure in society, rather than having it be associated with bad words automatically. So I certainly agree with you on that. And as far as sports goes, I can tell you, as far as the timing of your book, while again, I know you're not taking joy in all these bad stories that have happened with women that have come out and have made your book that much more relevant and cutting edge. I actually experienced the other side of this a long time ago, as far as events dictating circumstances. I got pulled into a book project with a friend. We were going to be self-publishing a book about how to survive the baseball lockout of 2001-2002 that was going to be coming. And we actually finished the book the week of 9/11, and then we kind of realized, oh, wait a minute, they're not going to have the Stones to lock out the players this off season. So we actually had circumstances work against our project. Fortunately, we didn't whine about it, because there were much more actual victims of 9/11. But, I've been on the other side of where you're at right now, as far as the zeitgeist finding you, and it certainly has.
Well, it's really hard. The bad news for anyone who writes a book is that it's never easy to have a successful book. And one of the things I've found that reflects the other side of that coin you're you're describing is that the media aren't interested in talking to an old white guy about issues related to masculinity. They're interested in having young young women on talking about the masculinity issues. And the book, Hannah Rawson's book, The End of Men, becomes a bestseller, and Rebecca Traister's book about the lack of educated men and the disappointment of women and being unable to find men equal to them, it becomes a bestseller. And the future of men, while it's been successful, it languishes, even though it's been the most accurate and prescient story about the realities of masculinity and feminism today. That's why I've changed the subtitle to Men on Trial, Future of Men, Men on Trial, because it's more of a media darling type of headline and relates to the current events. But it's been a real struggle for the media, for me to get to pay attention, because they want to tell the story of the negative side of men, and I tell the story of the positive side of men, the opportunities to bring up sons and daughters who have more positive attitudes. And I believe anyone who cares about the future generations of our sons and daughters and their sons and daughters should read this book. It really is a story of today. It's a story of the future, and it's a story every man will relate to, every woman will relate to. But at the end of the day, it's a positive, uplifting story about the future and the opportunities. And I believe if we can focus on the energies that are being put into telling the negative stories, into telling reinforcing the positive qualities and giving hope to the future generations, will be much better off.
Well, God bless you, Jack, because it's a story that needs telling. And again, just even to somebody like myself who, I've always had a very strong sense of gender pride. This is maybe the first time in my life I think I've ever really sort of figuratively had my head in my hands going, okay, who else did what to who? It's a lot to absorb, the way that we have been embarrassed by the most famous and powerful among us in our gender. But this too shall pass. Your book will be a good pathway for that. And again, as you said before, thank God for paperback, because that's always the second life for it. You get the subtitle on that sucker that more accurately reflects the moment, and then you're good to go, or at least you deserve to be anyways, and I'm sure that you will be, because again, the book really, really grabs it in this moment. The Future of Men, the present subtitle, hardcover subtitle, is Masculinity in the 21st Century, soon to be updated, but again, it really is a tremendous roadmap for what our gender can do to sort of avoid these landmines in the future. A pleasure to have you on, Jack. A great conversation, as I knew it would be. We really prize having great conversations on this show. It lived up to my expectations, and I really appreciate it.
Rick, it surpassed my expectations and hopes. I know you have a large audience and an important audience, so I hope they'll, give me a read. And my recommendation is read the first 44 pages and then pick out the chapters after that are most relevant and interesting to you.
Absolutely. And, of course, people can continue to follow you a number of different places, but including MediaVillage.com, also home to good friends of the show, Simon Applebaum and Stuart Elliott, a couple of great pros that we really love. And again, it was through them that we really began to anticipate having you on. And again, I really appreciate your time, Jack. Thank you so much for your time today. A great conversation, and thank you. I
hope you invite me back.
Oh, I'd love to have you back. You betcha. We'll get you back on and continue to discuss these and other vital matters. And thank you, everybody, for checking out FDH Lounge Mini Episode number 923.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and the Periodic Table of Elements.